our concern about the sacred is what we can get out of it, what we want for our immediate needs. But he I think, reminds us that the sacred, properly taught, should be seen as a set of possibilities and impossibilities in Nigeria and the post-colony. Humans encounter the sacred all around them, and we try to shape it, and it shapes us. And he talks of the law, the symbolic structures that regulates practices. The law makes a range of possibilities and regulates what is possible, not possible, and tells members of the community what works and does not work. But I think he doesn't stop there. He moves very quickly to the idea of grace that has the power of the exception. And using the exception here in Carl Schmitt's terms, grace can act or stop, suspend, open or reopen, and make some possibilities. And I think I find that even in my own life as something that we need to listen to, because we tend to think largely of our capabilities, but in thinking of our capabilities and what we are able to do, and like he shows very well in the book, The Power of the Big Pastors, we tend to ignore the force of grace that can not only transcend the law, but make all things possible. So how does knowledge of these possibilities lead to the conception of the sacred? And he argues the encounters between persons allow the holy to emerge. Listen, encounters between persons. I think a very important aspect of religion. I think it's Jesus himself. If you do not love one of these, my brothers or sisters, how can you claim? And so he brings it back to the ethical dimension. And that ethical dimension is always concerned with how we engage and interact with each other. But he also reminds us that many in Africa have accepted the idea that, quote, the holy emerges from social practice. The power that the gods possess is believed to depend on the social practice of human worship, and therefore humans reduce it or completely efface the power of any god by withdrawing worship. And I think by the time I got to that place, and I said that is true, and I don't have it in the notes, but I think the Pentecostals have something to teach us here. The idea of praise and worship, or the idea of just being in the presence of God, I think has something to do, because when we are in that posture, I think it is when we are able to be able to learn what.
Coming to the conclusion, Prof.
Oh, okay. So the rest of the text, then he discussed the beauty of the sacred. And then let me run down, since all of you have this. The next then is the structure of the sacred. And I found it very educative, very educational to me, that he borrows from the Calabari thought process, the sacred as a set of possibilities available to people. And he discusses that. At a time when, for most Pentecostals, indigenous religions are seen largely as satanic, it is very interesting that he taps into that to help us understand the sacred in the Christian tradition. You have my notes, and you can see the summary of what he says. So what is the overall lesson of sacredness in Kalabari society then? He argues the realm of the sacred is constituted by a dual understanding of possibility and impossibility. Again, it's not all what we can claim, name, claim, and so forth. We are invited to be able to understand that some things will work, some things may not work. So this understanding of the sacred is what makes life and civilization possible. He wants readers to understand that destiny is not always something that is locked up. And according to Wariboko, it is a journey in which acts create new conditions and situations, and these changes offers new destinies, opens new destinies, and according to Wariboko, in the process of the Bibibari, the Kalibari term, there is unfolding, folding, and enfolding of possibilities that are reversing necessity into the contingency, and in turn, contingency to necessity. Look, I can go on and on, but here is the one thing I have learned. We need to be aware of the sacred, and the sacred is everywhere. The sacred has left marks for us, and sometimes in our rush or in our desire to control things, we miss the power of the sacred. Thank you so much for writing this book. I think this is something one will have to go back to it over and over and over.
To make sense of it. Yeah, thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much. Let me straight go on to Professor Aferiani to give the discussion, and then we'll come back to Prof. Wariboko and then to the audience. So all of us, we should try to keep our time a little bit.
Thank you, Professor Kaunda. Thank you so much. Let me deeply appreciate Professor Wariboko for the invitation to participate in this panel and the opportunity to also go over this book again. This is not the first time I've gone over it and over it and over it again. Let me start by saying that it was Professor Wariboko that dragged me screaming into Nigerian Pentecostal discourses and studies. I think it's a very wonderful thing that he did. I've not regretted, engaging with Pentecostal philosophy, Pentecostal political philosophy, political theology. And he did this by the very force of his theorization, of everyday Pentecostal practices that we are all used to, things that we see in our churches, things that we see on social media, and then you go back to his book and you are able to see how these practices could be, theologized and theorized in ways that people do not give attention to. I once described Professor Wariboko as an exciting and exacting, theorist. You read his books, you read his, essays, and you are forced to reflect. You are forced to sit down, and think about, things, and you begin to wonder why you do not see these things, these practices this way before. It was from him that I began to think about Nigerian Pentecostalism and its epistemological framework. So from the time I read his theorization of Nigerian Pentecostal epistemology, he equipped me with the frames of references to analyze and theorize or theologize Pentecostalism, and especially its excesses in Nigeria, and this is where his idea of the Pentecostal incredible in this book, this is where it creeps into the theological combination of Pentecostal spirituality as we see it. Now, for him, Pentecostal incredible is one of the two responses to the post-colonial incredible in Nigeria. And the post-colonial incredible is the outlandish infraction of normality and its limits occasioned by the trauma of governance in post-colonial Nigeria. And the Pentecostal incredible is both constructive and destructive. And this is where there's going to be a bit of a difficulty in, trying to look at the destructive dimension in the transcript of the sacred in Nigeria, because Wariboko now went on in another book, The Pentecostal Hypothesis, to now take the Pentecostal incredible on his own terms, and then to now go through an understanding of how it could become a constructive idea, as different from the destructive one that he outlined in this book. But nevertheless, it tells us that the Pentecostal incredible is ambiguous, like I've said, and as a destructive phenomenon, it operates under what he calls the Pentecostal hypothesis. And that hypothesis simply states that something might not make sense, but it definitely makes spirit. That is the Pentecostal hypothesis, that, if anything happens, it might not make sense to, and everyday ordinary people, but it certainly does make spirit to the Pentecostal. This hypothesis enables the Pentecostal to challenge conventional wisdom and the epistemology of the commons, the epistemological common within which every other person operates in the polity. And it's in this sense a very beautiful rendition that Wariboko turns Dostoevsky's statements in the Brother Karamazov on his head. For Dostoevsky, if God doesn't exist, then everything is permitted. But according to Wariboko, for Nigerian Pentecostal operating under the reign of the Pentecostal incredible, it is exactly because God exists that everything is permitted. And you would just allow me to read a portion from the book. There are many Pentecostal, although certainly not all Nigerian Pentecostal, who claim to have direct insights into God's mind with the idea that this divinity demands critical resistance to the current society's knowledge systems and habitus. This God, they believe, often asks his followers to perform psychotic, delirious actions to prove their faith. The Pentecostal incredible is not simply, therefore, a breach, but an outlandish infraction of reason and Christian normativeness and their limits. So this is where we begin to ground, what the Pentecostal incredible is all about. Now, since I first read this articulation of the Pentecostal incredible, I have been trying to connect the way Professor Wariboko operationalized, its meaning to the larger pneumatological imagination that grounds Pentecostalism itself. In other words, how do we begin to think about the Pentecostal incredible within the context of Pentecostal spirituality itself? In what ways can we say that the Pentecostal incredible is essentially the culmination, of that pneumatological experience, pneumatological belief? So it is within these, when we begin to see the performances of Pentecostalism in Nigeria on social media, for instance. Recently, I read of a pastor who asked his congregation to come buy a piece of heavenly land for $100 each. Another one asked his congregants to pay 300, and it's astonishing how he arrived at that amount, 320,000 naira for a flight to heaven. And people were paying it. People want to get a plot of land in heaven. But you see, the for me, Prophet Odumeje, and you find Professor Odumeje on social media now, is both incredible and spectacular. And you find a whole lot of people flocking to his. It picks them up and slams them down in a bid to drive out demons, from them. And his congregation is large. So these are the issues that leads me to 3 correlative questions for Professor Wariboko. The first one is that if the pneumatological imagination is central to Pentecostalism, and the Pentecostal incredible is a logical outgrowth of that imagination, how can we argue that the Pentecostal incredible is, and I'm quoting Professor Wariboko now, the Pentecostal incredible is a mere traditional attitude to use God to fulfill wishful thinking or one's purposes and to manage or bandage the wounds of existence. Or, and he further claims, this is also from Professor Wariboko, the faith that is born or engendered by the Pentecostal incredible is not a movement towards something of ultimate concern or, or of ultimate meaning and significance. So if the Pentecostal incredible is not oriented towards something of ultimate concern, how come it emanates or is a logical or theological outflow of the pneumatic dynamics of Pentecostalism that foregrounds Christ and God? And here I'm leaning more on Amos Young's understanding of the pneumatological imagination. And for Amos Young, the pneumatological imagination is a site at which deity and humanity converge. So if God or Christ is at the zenith of that pneumatological imagination, how can we say, therefore, the way merely oriented to the Pentecostal pneumatological coextensive what is excessive, slamming them down, because he needs to cast out demons from them, slapping people, making fun of them in this church, and all of the spirit and excessive
Bluetooth disconnected. USB-C.
to reason. How then can we begin to judge it according to the standard of that reason that it is contrary to? Thank you very much. I think I will stop there. Thank you for this opportunity again, Professor.
Thank you so much, Prof, for those powerful questions. And before Professor Wariboko comes in, let me find out if from the audience we have some more questions so that we can bring all of the questions together. If anybody from the audience has a question, I would try to give you this opportunity. Any question from the book, not outside the book?
Questions.
Hello?
Questions. Yeah.
Okay, nobody?
Someone.
Just me. Thank you very much, the discussants. I'm very grateful. I mean, this is really mind-blowing. This is really educative for me, even though for quite some time I've been following Professor Wariboko's discussions about Pentecostalism. Pentecostalism is something that I'm quite very, very fascinated about. But this question, I can understand that your work is about analyzing everyday life, Pentecostal life or living. Do you stop at the level of analyzing and theorizing these things? Are there some forms of maybe recommendations in your work? Or that by my own analysis, I just feel that basically that maybe if we don't stop Pentecostalism in our country, Nigeria, maybe somehow Pentecostalism may even just be part of the things that will finally destroy this country. Thank you.
All right, Professor, as you are responding, please also pay attention that there are also some questions in the chat so that you can also respond to those questions together into that. Thank you, Prof. Over to you.
Okay. So thank you, everybody, and especially want to thank the Lagos Studies Association and for Professor Derrick, who 2 years in a row have spearheaded the formation of a panel. So my book usually comes to me, say he wants to do this and initiates. So I really appreciate all that he has done. So the last person to speak said, do we have recommendations? So in this book, in the last chapter, where I'm talking about religion and development, eventually, how will all these things affect the development, economic and political development of Nigeria? I talked about how do we need to think about development in the context of the sacred transcript, and how do we begin to theologize or philosophize about a figure that will come? So what are the ways that this religion can change, and therefore what kind of leader that would come that may turn things around? So there is some pointers to that, and definitely the man is correct that probably like Buhari said, if Nigeria doesn't have corruption, corruption will kill Nigeria. So probably it's the same thing. If we don't handle the things about Pentecostalism, at least it might not kill Nigeria, but it might lead to kind of the dumping down of reason in everything, and we are beginning to see it happen in many places, from the level of the presidency down to there. People do not value reason or good discourse as it should be, because they don't need to pay attention to anybody. So it doesn't make sense, it makes spirit. And definitely there are different forms of spirits, and one has to know which spirit it makes, but that is a different question. To come back to Professor Elias, I really like his take, because what it did for me, it's also to make me understand, recomprehend my book that I've done. He opened my eyes to it, and able to locate it in the wider religious discourse. So I find that interesting, that hearing him makes me want to go back and study the work, because wow, there are things that, because sometimes, to be very frank, I'm a Pentecostal, we write under the power of the Spirit. we don't always know the full extent of what we are writing until somebody says, right? So yeah, it could be that. And every writer knows that. Actually, you don't have to be Pentecostal. You write something and you find out that what you wrote is smarter than you, because somebody have seen value in it. And I thank him for that opportunity given to me to reflect more and to see possibly go his work. And the Professor Additional Folayan, he said, if the Pentecostal Incredible is a combination of the pneumatological imagination, why do I describe it as a mere tradition, a mere attitude? Well, for me, tradition is inherited practices, right? Something handover, something like McIntyre says, an ongoing argument. So what they are doing, yes, it's part of the material, but they're there of going to God and asking for your material satisfaction, even if it's ridiculous. That is there in just that mode of inertia. Just that is what I mean by doing it. Even though, yes, you cannot get the Pentecostal Incredible without going through the pneumatological imagination. But then it becomes an inertia. Basically, that's what we're doing. You are no more really engaging it or living up to the expectation. And by the way, the material imagination does not really mean much. Anybody that takes it seriously, even I don't know what Amos Young says is a conversion between deity and humanity. Every imagination is some form of convergence, right? And material imagination does not limit itself to Pentecostal. It exists in African traditional religion. It exists in every religion. The moment you leave the physical realm and you are looking at the invisible, you are a form of imagination. And every form of imagination is a convergence of things. Right? Because you say, oh, how do I move from here to there? You have to converge things in your head to so his definition will not take us very far, because every form of imagination, whether it's pneumatological or theoretical or physical, you're always bringing things to converge, and he happens to think that it's a convergence of God and humanity. And every religion basically is that form of convergence. But here we're talking about when that imagination goes to excesses, just like the way a physicist or what the Nazi physicists did is still imagination, it's still reasoning, but it went to excesses of destroying people, right? So imagination, it in itself could go anywhere. It could be just like the sacred. It could lead to something beautiful, monstrous, or ridiculous. So yeah, it does that. So that it's not surprising that Pentecostals' imagination will go to that level where they think that through their imagination they could change everything. Every impossibility could change to whatever they require. And because God exists, they can do everything. Because God exists, you can throw a pregnant woman, as he said, or do major down. Because God exists, you can just buy jets and say, Holy Spirit, speak to you. Because God exists, you can say you drink beverage with invisible pills. You know, so God exists, allows you to say all that. And that is part of the essence. But then, in that part of the book that he quotes, like 119 to 120, it says what these people are doing, that they're engaged in this incredible because of the material gains or things they will get, not because they want to have communion with God, not because there is this thing about what Paul said, faith is the ultimate grasping you of what Richard Niebuhr said. Even in America, he said there is no radical monotheism. At best, what you have is either polytheism or henotheism. Henotheism means God becomes one center of value among many things. And for Pentecostals, material wealth, living big, surviving is just one center of value that controls them compared to the God. So God is not the ultimate, it's not the highest. God is plenary concerned for their real purpose of material achievement, right? So that is where they displace God. So that is what I meant. But the imagination is still there. It takes an imagination to know that you can use God as a stepping stone to there. And this is what Robin Hutton also said when he defined religion. He said religion, Hutton said, communion with God for God's sake, and explanation, prediction, and control. And he said, in a good part of African traditional religion, it's explanation, prediction, and control that take precedence. But there are a lot of Africans who just worship God for God's sake, who believe in this concept of the pure means, just worship. But a good part, because we go to God to explain our world, to control our world, and to predict our world. And that's what Pentecostals are doing. But they will tell you, oh, we are interested in God for God's sake. And that is the decision I'm making. And all that is based on their imagination. So it's a logical outcome. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily a good outcome, or it's just one of those outcomes. Then why is it an essence? Why can we use reason? Actually, in the book on page 109, I said it's kind of a rational irrationalism. So it's an emotion. It's not completely devoid of reason. And even emotion, and Martha Nussbaum says, emotion, even fear as an emotion, is a form of reason. Because she said, when a lion comes into a room and it just flee, it's an emotion of fear, But you flee because you know if you stay there, the lion will eat you.
To someone else.
Right? So it's not, so they are doing this emotionalism and irrational stuff. And they have reason in the sense that of Max Weber idea that what is rationality? The rationality is ends and means. Anybody who is able to combine ends and means, for Max Weber, you are rational. Right? So Pentecostals know the means is pneumatological imagination, the incredible, to get their beauty. So there is some rationality. Now, it's SSs, but it's SSs that is internal to them, right? It's something we don't even need to judge as an SSs because something to be SS within itself that we could see that within their community they will say this one has gone beyond the limit of what they know, but it could also still be there. But the book can make that judgment because the book starts with the fact that there is the beautiful, the monstrous, and the ridiculous. And for Africa, we want the beautiful because that is what makes us grow. So anything that, in spite of whether it's religious, political, or so, that for us as Africa, or for me as an artist, that does not push us to the beautiful, but still kills us, we can make this in. Yes, so sometimes value could be imposed as a society in the commons. It's not with the commons. What is good for all of us? Pentecostalism do not own the commons. So if they're polluting, destroying the common, the rest of us can say, this, we should never shy away from saying, for our African society, we want things that will push us further. And that is what, how we can impose that standard and say, if you are then doing something out of the commons, because the moment we concede the commons totally to them, as the man answer the question, it will destroy all of us. It will because religion in any society, when it goes to excesses and it loses touch with the ground, could decide that when everything is permitted because God exists, that means we can put nails in children's head because God told us their wishes. We can do all sorts of things. We can slap a young girl, a bishop, because he says he's hearing from God. But it's the duty of the rest of society to say, thou shalt not go any further because the commons belongs to all of us.
Thank you, Prof. And before you go, because there is another question, and I want you to stick on what you have just said here so that you don't forget. The very idea of the sacred and your definition of it, which seems that your argument that the sacred can be more in the context where there isn't even a religion. Is it possible that the sacred, in fact, can function in a dictator context as long as people have this access to these possibilities? And it's possible that it cannot be even function in the context of democracy as long as the possibilities have been hindered by the system. Like, for instance, the struggle that is going on in Kenya, for instance, where people are being taxed so much and they go to protest and they are criminalized in the very process of doing that. That's one thing that I wanted to talk to into this. Please, can you mute there because it's echoing from here. So that's one aspect. And then the second aspect to this is, if the critique of the sacred is itself the premise of all critique in Africa, for instance, would you argue that instead of thinking religion as pure means, Pentecostals should think the religion as the site that creates these possibilities? Or are you saying that in fact religion, or Pentecostal in this context, should be a platform that enables or empowers the people to understand, first and foremost, the sacred itself, how it manifests, the dangers that it has, the very fact that there are possibilities that can be accessed or not be accessed by people, but although this different level, the fact that it can be beautiful with almost like foundation already available to everybody. Second, it can be monstrous, destabilized, disrupted, And then there is a redemptive dimension into it, which is ridiculous, which comes into it and redeem the whole system, if they understand that. I wanted to make a comment because this is very, very beautiful, the analogy that you put here between the very foundation, the beauty, which is the framework of existence, and the very fact that people can access, it's available to everybody, but it can also be hindered. Then the monstrous comes into it, which hinders the whole system from functioning, which would mean that Pentecostals and their pneumatological imagination fundamentally has been functioning as a monstrous system, which comes your concept of the Pentecostal incredible, almost like this monstrous system, thinking that we are actually accessing the beauty, but in fact, we have become the hindrance to the beauty. We become the monstrous system. So how do we bring in the redemption in the context where people can't see that they have become a monstrous system? That's why I've been struggling with your book and with all the beauty that comes into it.
Okay, so basically you've answered your questions from what you said. You've laid out the solution and everything. And like a good Pentecostal, I would say, let's somebody shout hallelujah. So basically, yeah. So the idea of writing this book is to make people realize that, yeah, the possibilities that exist in religion could be very monstrous, and how do we get it back? And that's why at the end of the book, I'm talking about the ridiculous, a redemptive figure, but not necessarily a divine, a messianic figure, but even a political figure. And as part of me that in my college and other days is masses, you got to say, look, there has to be some kind of revolution, some kind of a change. But I'm not saying a communist change, but there has to be some kind of a change. And the church should realize that possibilities do not only exist in the church. It exists in everything. And the idea that because you are African doesn't mean that you have more possibilities than Americans or Europeans, because we have to look at possibilities in all dimensions of where we can get it to lift up our lives. So religion is one way we assess. Take the crossing of the Red Sea in Exodus, right? Okay, fine. We come to a Red Sea. Today, if you have a plane, a ship, we could use it to cross the Red Sea. But if you don't have, you need a God to part the Red Sea. God and the plane and the ship are forms of possibilities to enable you reach your next goal, right? So if there was airplane then and ship and submarines then, would God not have used it to change it? These are the possibilities that God has given to human beings to create. But if you are still expecting that we'll go to the Red Sea, and when we could create better option that somehow the sea is going to part. I'm not saying it will not part. Miracles happen. I'm not saying even if it doesn't make sense, it can make spirit. But I would rather build a society that when we come to a place like the Red Sea, we have modern means of transport, right? So religion is just one way we assess those kinds of possibilities, and technology, and to have a religion that is almost anti-reason, anti-technology is crippling the Africa's possibilities. I want every child growing up in Africa to have the possibility of employment or work or growth and the possibility to live longer, right? But so all those things, for a society to think that everything about our possibility could be subsumed under Pentecostalism, under religion is wrong. And part of writing this book is to begin to say, how do our leaders think about Africa as creating the possibilities, right, that will make our people to live a better life. And I said in the book, religion is just one of those possibilities. You can create the technology. You can make internet work. You can give us security, and you can reduce violence in society. And you can recognize that religion could also be a source of violence. It's not always for good. That's why there is this chapter on religion. But religion can also give you a sense of purpose to say you are a choosing people of God. And if that helps you to become better, just like Max Weber wrote in Protestant Ethics and the Spirit of Capitalism, it gives you a sense. Our governance system should be able to tap into different ways of giving Africans a sense of purpose and meaning to be able to create more possibilities for themselves. So it's in that way, I'm saying. And then somebody put in the question about don't you think that the Pentecostal is a form of delusion or mental illness and psychosis? Well, it's possible that some dimensions of it, I don't want to use a towel brush. Some of these pastors, some of these people, maybe their heads should be shacked. Right? Some of the things that they ask people to do, to drink bleach, to eat grass, to do all sorts of things, or the pastor asking the woman to lie down on the altar and he's on top of her, thrusting himself so that it's mimicking how she's going to get pregnant. Maybe some of those essences could be not everybody that goes to religion or becomes a pastor is mentally okay. So the person is right that we are being entertained often by these churches. It's a form of entertainment, and we don't see the delusional aspect or the psychotic aspect of what I do. Because the moment anybody says, I can do anything in the name of God, for me, that's a little dimension of psychosis. Because the person can kill. It's not psychosis to get 3-year-olds and say their wishes and you beat them to death or you drive nails into their body. That's yes. But how do people see that and remain calm? Because of this Pentecostal incredible, a distortion of faith and a distortion of the pneumatological imagination, which now tells you, as long as you can imagine it, means it's okay. But also one of the results, one of the things about the sacred, where I say the sacred tells us what we can do, so that not all possibilities are allowed by the sacred at any point in time. When I meet you in a primitive society on a road, there's a possibility that probably I'm afraid you will kill me, so my tribe and you will kill the person first. That's a possibility, right? But when a student comes into our class, there is a possibility that the professor can rape the student in front of other students, or the professor can beat that student, or the professor in other places can sleep with that student. But what the society do? We make laws to say such possibilities are not allowed. You can't just beat your student because they're in class. You can't just rape them. You can't just kill somebody. So there's always laws that will guide us about which possibilities we're allowed to express. But the sacred ultimately is the universe of possibility. But if you expose everybody to the full set of possibilities, society will break down. When you marry somebody, your wife or your husband, there's a possibility that you wake up in the night and kill her. But you know that society does not allow that possibility. And so she takes it for granted, right? And you take it for but it's still a possibility. So society have to control certain possibilities so that we can live a better life. But in a situation where religion has said there's no control over what kind of possibilities they will allow, then we are running a risk as a society.
Well done, Prof. Sir.
Thank you so much, Prof. Sorry, sorry. Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof. I think we are coming to the end at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry for those who have.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, you can hear you.
Yeah, there is a particular Kemi F on the attendees who wants to ask a question. Kemi F, are you there?
Okay.
Okay, that will be the last question that is being asked because we've run out of time and I need to conclude.
I already put the question in the Q&A. Was the question about psychosis. Thank you very much, sir.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Kemi. All right, Prof, thank you so much once again for this very beautiful and for all the discussants. I want to thank you. At this time, I also want to celebrate Professor Nimi Wariboko. I think just a few weeks ago, he was appointed as the Director of African Studies at Boston University, and we are so proud of you. Thank you so much. I think all of us, we deserve to give him a hand of applause. Thank you, Prof. And I want to conclude and say that thank you for all of you who came here. We really appreciate. Professor Nim, continue, keep up the great work, and God bless you. So thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you.